If you're joining us on Research Quest Live or on Facebook, I'd like to introduce you to my good friend, Ellen Erickson, who super rules in a lot of different ways. Good morning, good morning. Ooh, let me get you, whoop. Uh-oh, unmuted? Here we go.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing today?
Awesome, nice to see you, Aiden.
It's nice to see you too. How have you been?
Lovely, it really has been some fun weather here in Salt Lake lately, so I'm excited to talk with you about some citizen science things to get people outside more and motivated to notice the fun stuff that's outside their doors.
Yeah, Ellen is our community science or citizen science coordinator at the Natural History Museum of Utah. And I guess we should start off by asking, like, what is citizen science and is it different from community science?
Oh, great question. So citizen science is really any time that someone who's not a professionally trained scientist, so that includes me and likely many of our viewers, anytime we're contributing to research that's being done by professionally trained scientists. And so it's a cool way for us to make an impact on the scientific community without necessarily having to have studied it in school. And then you asked about community science too.
Mm-hmm.
So citizen science has been sort of the traditional term for non-scientists engaging in science for a long time. And in the past several years, there's been a new term emerging called community science. And community science is similar to citizen science in a lot of ways. It still is all about people who are not professionally trained scientists engaging in scientific practices. But there's some different layers to it than citizen science has, and like the term community really kind of getting at anybody can participate, and it really has a lot of roots in sort of social justice things and asking community related questions about how science is impacting the way that we live, and really bringing in lots of different voices into scientific conversations. But they're both really amazing things and things I feel really lucky to do as part of my job. It's a really fun thing to connect members of the community, people just like our viewers, with cool research that's being done at the Natural History Museum of Utah and beyond.
Yeah, there's been a lot. We've talked about community science like here and there all week. We talked about it with Christy Bills. We talked about it with Austin Green, who has like a project that people can help work on, and we can talk a little bit more about that later. Actually, you know what? Let's talk a little bit more about that now. I do want to tell you, I thought of you because I went on a nice walk around my neighborhood, and I went on like a rose smelling tour of my entire neighborhood because
Nice.
these roses are blooming and they all smell a little bit different. I was looking for nature where I could find it.
I love it. That's awesome.
So like I said, we had talked with Austin Green about his Wasatch Wildlife Watch project. Are there any other citizen science projects at the museum, or is there one that's your like personal like favorite?
Well, they all hold special places in my heart, and Wasatch Wildlife is definitely one of them. You mentioned talking with Christy Bills, who is the entomologist for NHMU, earlier this week. She runs an amazing citizen science, community science project called, that's focused on fireflies in the Western United States, and she calls it the Western Firefly Project, as she likely talked about. People can find fireflies all over the Western United States, specifically in Utah, Nevada, Colorado, Idaho, and New Mexico are places that we've got confirmed sightings. And those are all places where the sightings have come from citizen scientists, because it's impossible for Christy and her small team to be in all of those places at one time. And so we depend on eyes all over the state and beyond to look for fireflies and report those sightings to us. So that's pretty exciting because we've got lots of cool discoveries that have come from that. The museum also runs two other fun citizen science projects that are looking at introduced species in the state of Utah. So species that aren't native, they're not supposed to be here, but they are now. Mm-hmm. One of them is a tree squirrel species called the fox squirrel. And another is an insect species called the European firebug. And as I mentioned, neither are native to the state of Utah, but they're here now. And so we're studying them. And really right now where we are in the research phase is trying to understand where in the state they're living. And so we depend on citizen scientists to help, again, be our eyes and make observations of where they're seeing those species and letting us know.
Awesome. Well, I've been asking you a whole bunch of questions, but friends, if you have questions for Ellen, please feel free to press the ask a question button or leave us a comment on Facebook, and we would love to ask Ellen on your behalf. So here's a critical question. Say I'm in my front yard and the squirrel that's been visiting my bird feeder, I've been calling her Hazel, is visiting. She's got like, and I make these observations. She's got like brown and she's got like an orangey-ish belly and she's like not scared of anything. She's a very brave squirrel. And so like, I have now seen this squirrel. How do I share what I have seen with a scientist?
That's such a good question, Aiden. So first, I want to just applaud you for your observation skills and recognizing that that's something that you're seeing. All of us are noticing nature outside of our homes or our schools or our works or cars, wherever we happen to be during the day. There's nature around and we're seeing it. And so you might not even really recognize it, but potentially this morning you've already seen birds flying outside of your window or a spider hanging out in the corner of your house somewhere. Being observant of your surroundings is step one to being a citizen scientist. So yes. Step two is recording that observation and sharing it with a scientist. So that's exactly what your question is getting at. And so there's a pretty cool tool that the Natural History Museum uses for a lot of our citizen science activities. And so for the Fox Squirrel project that I mentioned, plays into that pretty nicely. And so we use this awesome online platform that's free for anybody to use called iNaturalist. And iNaturalist is essentially this online database of biodiversity. And so it was designed for anybody anywhere in the world to take a photo of any wild living thing that they see, save the photo to the iNaturalist site, and then it becomes a data point of that specific species in that specific location at that specific time, which is pretty cool. So it's this amazing little record of biodiversity. And so you're saving a photo that's attached to it. And the platform is pretty awesome. In the past several years, they've really made some cool changes to it. And so it has this artificial intelligence capability. So now it'll help you identify what it is you've taken a picture of. So if you see a squirrel in your yard and you're noticing behaviors that it has, but you don't know what it is specifically, you can take a picture of it, ask iNaturalist what it is, and it's going to think about what it is based on the photo that you've taken and give you some suggestions. You can pick the suggestion you like the best and then save it. And then another amazing thing about iNaturalist is that it's this online community of people. And so others will see your post, likely others who know a lot about squirrels, and they can help either confirm that the sighting you've made is correct, or they can suggest a different ID of a different species. And something that I love about all of that is that, as I mentioned, it's a record of that one squirrel in your yard in that one moment in time. If you add that, picture that one observation as a puzzle piece, and if you add that little puzzle piece to this big puzzle of worldwide biodiversity with everybody being a citizen scientist, adding observations wherever they happen to be, that starts to create a pretty cool picture. You're filling in all these spaces, these blank spaces of biodiversity we don't know about with these small little puzzle pieces. I think it's pretty exciting.
I think that sounds super exciting too, which leads me to my next question. So, all right, I've got my picture of Hazel. She's like really manhandled my bird feeder. Snapped a picture. So I share this picture onto iNaturalist. Can I see? So I've now shared my puzzle piece. Is it possible for me to see like the other puzzle pieces or like data points in my area?
Definitely. iNaturalist is not only is it saving all this cool puzzle piece biodiversity data, but it's saving it for everybody to look at or anybody to look at. And so it becomes available data to the world. And so scientists can look at it who happen to be studying squirrels, like those at the Natural History Museum, or people like us who just happen to be interested in squirrels or curious if there are other hazels out there in the world, we can look and find records of other squirrels that look like ours too.
That's very cool. Here's an important question. So now we've been talking about the squirrels for a little bit. Do we have any information that we've gathered from, I mean, I know we're gathering all these data points, but are there any kind of like results from the research that is begun with the fox squirrel study, or do we still need more data points for it to be better?
Well, so definitely always more data is better. And so we're going to keep gathering as much data as we can on squirrels. That said, some of the data that we've collected has been super useful in helping us understand where they're living. I mentioned that they are not native to the state of Utah. And so they were first sort of reported around in Utah, in the Salt Lake Valley, a little over 10 years ago. And we don't know how they got here. We may never know how they got here, but we obviously know they're living here now. And iNaturalist is really helping us understand the spread of the species. And so you can look on iNaturalist, there's some cool search capabilities. So you can look at specific species, and then you can look at dates that they've been observed. And so it'll show you these points on a map and how they've changed. And so if you look at fox squirrel observations that were recorded on the site 10 years ago versus now, there are significantly more now, and their range is a lot broader. And so we're seeing, even over the past month, new observations of fox squirrels coming in parts of the state we've never seen them before. And so they've always been sort of around the Salt Lake Valley. And now they're starting to be observed down in Spanish Fork and a little bit farther south, which is pretty wild. And I think the most north they've been observed so far is around Ogden. But then there are some interesting spaces in between. So we have a bunch of observations in the Salt Lake Valley, a few in Spanish Fork, a few in Ogden, but then there are these sort of patches in between that where we're not seeing observations come in. And that could be because squirrels are not there. It also could be because there's no one there making observations of fox squirrels yet. And so the limitation of iNaturalist is that it's recording amazing data, but it doesn't mean that's the only data on a specific species. And so just because it hasn't been added to iNaturalist doesn't mean it's not there, if that makes sense.
Yeah. We need people to go out and explore those spaces or submit observations. Well, so we've been talking about the squirrels, and I think I had a chit chat with Chris Bills on Tuesday about like looking at what bugs were in our area for iNaturalist, because I've used iNaturalist not just as a way to like submit things to scientists, like my picture of Hazel, but you can use it to like learn more about what's in your area. Would it be possible for us to look at a map and like kind of see some bugs? And friends, if you're joining us, why don't you send in some place or an animal that you might be interested in? We might have some time to be able to like fill in with find some interesting data points for some animals. We have some, we have an excellent question. Jack from Park City, I know while you're pulling up iNaturalist, if you want to brainstorm this,
yeah.
Has there ever been a citizen scientist who discovered something new? This is a very good question.
Jack, it's an amazing question. And to be honest, I don't know. I wish I had way better stories to tell you about. I do have a couple fun things I could share, and maybe I'll just focus on one. So yes, citizen scientists have found amazing things. And the first thing that's coming to mind for me in this moment is some cool stuff that's been coming out of California. The Natural History Museum of LA County does a bunch of awesome citizen science work also. And like Salt Lake City, where we have a bunch of urban spaces, LA is also super urban. And a lot of the urban spaces are private land. And so if you're a researcher in LA and you're wanting to look at wildlife and species spread, you can't just be walking around neighborhoods and looking in people's yards to gather data, because that's someone's property. And so citizen science is a really important research tool for them in lots of ways, because it basically opens up people's yards to research, because you're in your yard, you're taking photos of things. And then that becomes available to these researchers. And so there have been several really cool discoveries of various species of amphibians and reptiles in Southern California that
Cool.
researchers at the museum didn't know about. Many of them are also invasive and introduced species. So things that aren't supposed to traditionally be living in California, but because of the climate there, lots of wonderful things love to hang out. And so things get introduced on plants at nurseries that get flown in from other parts of the world, or various shipments that are coming in. Sometimes they're little hitchhikers that are part of those shipments that are wild, and that's how they become introduced to places. And so they've learned about species of reptiles and amphibians living right in their backyards that they didn't know about, thanks to observations being made by citizen scientists. And those citizen scientists have no idea that they're discovering something that scientists don't know a lot about. And that's something that I like about citizen science a lot. There's this whole kind of element of, you don't know what you're finding necessarily, or maybe you know the thing that you're seeing, but you don't know the implications that it could have on science. And so maybe you think that you're seeing something in your yard that is boring and you see all the time, but that doesn't mean that it's boring to somebody else, especially a scientist who might be studying it and you just have no idea.
Yep, I completely agree. I know that there's been citizen science, like you're saying, opens up a lot of opportunities for scientists to gather data. It's like many hands make light work kind of thing. Like the more eyes you have looking for different species, like the better. So, and really every data point, Jack, that you add is a new discovery, right? It like, especially as Ellen was mentioning, there's these places where we don't have any data points for fox squirrels. Maybe they aren't there, but we don't have any data points. But if there's somebody submitting pictures and finding them out there, then we need to have data points, right? So we need to send, so if you're out in a space where you see a fox squirrel, take a picture of it. Maybe you will be filling in a hole in the map.
That's totally right. That's totally right. And if you're really, especially in Utah, any squirrel you see anywhere, take a picture of it and put it on iNaturalist, because information about other squirrels that are living too is helpful to us, because you can do cool things where you look at one of our research questions really with the fox squirrels are, how are they impacting the environment here? And so part of that is, are they getting along with the native tree squirrel species? Are they causing those native species to move somewhere else? Are they living in the same places? Do they compete for resources? Like, do they have the same food? Do they want to nest in the same places? Those are a lot of questions that we have. And so if we can use iNaturalist to look and say, oh, look, we've got lots of American red squirrels, which is the native tree squirrel species here in northern Utah, living in these same places that fox squirrels are living, maybe that's the beginning of an indication that they can coexist in an okay way. Where if we're seeing them not in the same places, then maybe that means that they don't like to live in the same place as each other. So that can really jumpstart some cool research questions for us.
Sure. And I would say you should just take regular pictures of squirrels anyways, because they're cute, but
it's true. It's true. And fox squirrels especially are very charismatic, like you were mentioning, Aiden. So they're always doing some cool stuff, hanging in some crazy ways from bird feeders and running across power lines. And they're pretty interesting.
She does a lot of hot stunts getting to the bird feeder.
I'm happy to share my screen with you and we can.
Oh, sure. Go for it. I think it's all set up so that you can do that. Let me double check. Yeah, go for it.
So you were asking about looking for things here in Utah, is that right? Or were you?
Yeah, on Tuesday with Christy Bills, we were talking about like what bugs might students start to see in their backyards, and we are the Natural History Museum of Utah, so we'll not limit it to just the Wasatch Front because there's people in our entire beautiful state. So let's just can we look and see what bugs have been like recently reported in Utah?
Definitely. I love that question. So if you go, so I didn't really mention this earlier, but iNaturalist exists in two different places, but it's the same thing. And so one place that exists is online. So this is on my web browser. You go to the website, you can click on this icon here that says explore, and it's going to take you to this map. And the map includes all of these red dots, which is over 38 million different observations of biodiversity people have made in the world. So each one of those red dots represents one of those puzzle pieces that I was mentioning earlier.
It's a lot of puzzle
So
pieces.
pretty cool. This is, there's a lot of awesome stuff there. And then you have the ability to search in lots of fun ways. The other cool place that you can use iNaturalist is on your phone. You can download it as an app onto any mobile device that you happen to have. This is how I use iNaturalist most frequently when I'm making observations. And so you're outside, you see your squirrel, you see a European firebug, you see a dandelion in your yard, whatever you want, take a picture of it, and you can save it to iNaturalist really easily from your mobile device to make that observation. So looking here again at the web browser, you're asking about insects that we can see in Utah. So I can start to fill in insects here, and that's gonna change the dots that are showing up in the world. And so it's narrowed it down to a little over 9 million. And
that's a much more reasonable number.
a lot easier. And then you can search by location, and you can narrow locations down to pretty small areas, but I love looking at Utah. So Utah, USA. And it'll show all of the cool observations that have been made. And so,
oh my gosh, that's so cool.
This is great.
Someone out in Tokerville saw a Western rhinoceros beetle. What?
That's fun. So there are lots of different cool views and ways that you can play around with this. So this is the map view, which I love. So if you based on wherever your house is or wherever your school is or your museum is, whatever you're interested in, you can zoom in onto the map really close and see all of the observations that have been made around. You could also just sort of browse all of the fun things. So these are the most recent observations that have been added to the site. So yeah, this Western rhinoceros beetle is pretty awesome. You can click on that. It'll take you to the observation itself.
Oh, that's so cool. Look at his little horn. Oh.
Pretty cool, right? And this is not exactly an insect. I've never seen this insect before myself, and not something if I had seen a picture of insects that you might see in Utah, I would probably guess this is not one of them, because I don't know a whole bunch about insects. But turns out I would have been wrong, because here they are. What I love about this observation is that multiple pictures were taken. And so this person looks like they gently flipped the beetle over so they could get some pictures of their underbelly. So you have all these cool different angles of the head, side view, so you can really see the
little horn
there. And then they're holding it too, so you get kind of a sense of the size. And that's a cool thing about iNaturalist. You can add more than one photo to an observation that you're making. A tip is to make sure that all of those photos are of the same species. So you would never make an observation that has a picture of this rhinoceros beetle and a dandelion and a bird all in the same thing. You would want to make each of those species its own separate observation. And then anyone who happens to know a lot about Western rhinoceros beetles, not me, can look at this photo and they can check out all of these pictures and say, yeah, that's exactly what this is.
Cool.
You can see here it says needs ID. That means that other people in the iNaturalist community haven't yet looked at this picture and confirmed or agreed with what they saw, if that makes sense. And so there's a chance that this is not the correct ID. It could be
something slightly different.
Something slightly different. Anyway, so we can go back to our search site. And we could look for.
We got a comment from Julie via Facebook who says she loves using it on her phone. Snails, yellow jackets, birds, spiders. I love that it helps me identify them.
Yay! That's awesome, Julie. And it's the same for me. I think even just in a personal way, iNaturalist is so useful to helping identify things that live in my yard that I was seeing all the time. And I had no idea what they were. Little garden spiders and plants, weeds that were kind of growing the cracks of my driveway. I know what those are now, and iNaturalist is the reason. And that's pretty fun. So not only am I learning some things about my own backyard and my neighborhood, but it's fun to know that those pictures I add also become interesting data for others. Here's some more cool species that have been found in Utah recently. And so and it can tell you how many have been noted, but looks like Western honeybees have been observed 468 times. The European firebug, I was mentioning this earlier, this introduced species that the museum is studying. We've got over 400 observations of them, painted lady butterflies. So this list is being ranked in order of the most observed species in the state. Pretty fun.
Cool. There we go. The
on the
answer to what bugs you can see in your own backyard.
That's exactly right. It labels things as invasive. It labels things as being native. And then there are a lot of cool filters you can add. I won't go into this, but you can look for things that are threatened and it'll sort the search for you. So if you're curious on what threatened insects have been observed in the state, you can find that. Some of these actually, this flame skipper, the 8-spotted skimmer, and this 12-spotted skimmer, they're all dragonfly species. And those are some cool, those have been spotted at a place where we host some bioblitzes in the summertime, which is bioblitz is a term for collecting biodiversity data in one location during a specific time. And so the museum hosts these bioblitz events where we meet at a city park, and collectively the group of us gather as many observations as we can of species living in the park. So we're using our phones and we're taking pictures of basically everything that we see that's wild and that's living. And one of the sites we host bioblitzes at is called the Fife Wetland Preserve. It's along the Jordan River. And we've identified at least 40 species of insects and arachnids that have been verified as research grade, which means that multiple people have looked at the species observation and said, yes, that is what it is, which is pretty cool. And 3 of them are those flame skimmers I was just showing you, which are threatened species of dragonflies. And so because of that, the Salt Lake City's Trails and Natural Lands Department has changed some of their management practices with weeds in the park. And because citizen scientists found those species, the city now pulls weeds, they hand pull weeds instead of going in and spraying a lot of the weeds. Because when you spray chemicals on weeds to get rid of them, it gets rid of the weeds, but it also gets rid of the things that are living on the weeds. So insects being one of them. And so hand pulling is a lot less invasive. So it's kind of cool because of this data. The city's changed some of its management practices, which is pretty fun. So that helped them learn a little bit more about their own properties, which is amazing. And so that's all because of citizen scientists gathering data.
Yeah. It's so like, that's the natural next step, right? Like once all this data is gathered, like what is it used for? It helps inform decisions made by counties and park management and all of that stuff. Which brings me, so we talked a little bit about submitting pictures and things like that. Helen from Ogden, she asked this a little earlier in our interview, but I've been waiting on it because I want to play a little game. She asked, she has a question about what she should take, like how to take or what we should take pictures of. I will ask her question. Should I take photos of flowers when they are not blooming?
Ooh, that's a great question, Helen. So yes, definitely. Sometimes, especially with plants, they're a lot easier to identify when they're flowering because that distinguishes them among other species of flowers. And so flowers can certainly be helpful, but I do this all the time. You can't wait around for the flower to bloom necessarily. Maybe you're on a hike and you're not going to see that flower again or that plant again. Take a picture of it. When you do take a picture of it, there are some things you can do to help maybe make that observation be easier to identify, both for the iNaturalist artificial intelligence. I do this because it has like a little spinning thing while it thinks.
Yeah.
So the AI functionality will work a lot better if you have certain kinds of photos, but also the other people that are looking who know about plants need more information. And so if you take a picture of, and this goes for if there's a flower on the plant as well, you want to have a picture of a bunch of different angles of the plant. So make sure you have a photo of what the leaves look like a close-up on what the leaves and the pattern of them, how they're branching off from the stem. Sometimes it can be really helpful to have a picture that shows the underside of a leaf. Like, is it fuzzy? Is it not fuzzy? That kind of thing can matter when you're doing plant IDs. It's a good idea to have a picture of the entire plant itself. And so not just these zoomed in pictures, but also sort of a zoomed out view of the entire thing. So definitely possible. And so like I said, sometimes having the flower can be more useful. And if it's something that you really do want to know how to identify and you can't really successfully identify it without a flower, and you have the ability to go back, check it out when it is flowering too.
Excellent. That leads me into our game of like, can you record it? Okay, so could I take a picture of my cat and submit it? It's an animal.
Good question. Yes, you could take a picture of your cat. Is that quality data on iNaturalist? No. So the site would say, this looks like a domestic cat. And you could save it like that, but it's never going to become research grade data because it is it's a pet, it's a domesticated creature.
Okay, so my cat is never going to become like iNaturalist famous. Got it.
Definitely not. And it's not useful to scientists really in any way. And so though the site is able to capture something like that, I think it's best to not add.
Fair enough. Could I take a picture of a flower growing in the sidewalk?
Absolutely, yes. I think sometimes people feel like, especially with weeds or things that are growing in the cracks of sidewalks and buildings, you think, oh, there it is. That's a wild thing. And even though it maybe seems not that wild because it's growing from a not wild place, somehow that plant seeded itself in that tiny patch of dirt and is growing. That's pretty cool. And so
that's kind of amazing.
It is kind of amazing. And so that is nature living in our urban environments. And so, yes, anytime you see any kind of plant growing in places you wouldn't expect, it's a perfect thing to add to iNaturalist.
So I couldn't take a picture of like one of the roses I saw in someone's yard.
Good question. So the answer to all of these things is probably going to be yes, of course you can take a picture of it, but is it good data for iNaturalist?
I see what you're saying.
Is I guess what I'm sort of getting at with that. So yeah, you can add a picture of a rose bush to iNaturalist, but if it's a species of rose that is cultivated or it was purchased at a nursery, it was planted by a human, then that's not helping us showcase biodiversity of wild things on the planet. It's just showcasing the makeup of somebody's garden. And so out in my yard, I certainly have a mixture of some plants that I've put there because they look pretty or they smell nice or they give me delicious food to eat, or even things that I've planted or other people have planted to give me shade, like trees that are not wild and didn't start existing on their own. They were put there by a human at some point. Those are not good candidates for iNaturalist observations.
Did a human put it there is a good like litmus test, it seems.
It is, and really it's something that we talk about when we do programming is if it is a human or it belongs to a human, it's not a good candidate for an iNaturalist observation.
Excellent. Well, one of the things that you were mentioning to Helen was like taking pictures about like the underside of the leaf and trying to be really thorough in your documentation of nature, whatever it is you're trying to observe. Tyler from Logan asks, should I bring rulers along for iNaturalist? I was thinking like that guy person had the bug in their fingers to like show how big it was.
Yeah.
Should you bring rulers along or what are some good ways to observe nature closely without bothering it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so when I'm doing iNaturalist observations, it kind of falls into two different camps for me. One is I just happen to be on a walk in my neighborhood or on a hike, and I'm just trudging along and I see something cool and I'll pull out my phone and you take a picture of it. Sometimes in those moments, it's a bird that's flying by or it's an insect that's moving quickly. And so you don't have a lot of time to capture it. And so you take the best photo that you can. If you're out and you're doing a more intentional search for things. So maybe you're running your own kind of BioBlitz and you're deciding that I'm going to go on a hike today, or I'm going to go back in my backyard and I'm going to find things to put on iNaturalist, which I will add is also a very fun thing to do. It's a really
A backyard BioBlitz bonanza sounds fun.
it's so funny. And really the museum, the Natural History Museum of Utah will have some fun excuses for you to get out there and do that this summer. We'll be hosting some virtual BioBlitzes at some sites along the Jordan River and also along the Bonneville Shoreline Trail multiple times this summer.
Ooh,
so
fun.
thank you in advance for joining us for those events and helping be a citizen scientist to collect data. You can look for more information about those programs on the museum's website. It'll be coming soon. It's part of our program called Salt Lake City Neighborhood Naturalists, which all of you can be, even if you're not living right in Salt Lake City. But I digress. So you can do your own fun sort of BioBlitz from your yard too, or your hike or whatever. And so I really, this is something that I do. This is something I do. I enjoy it.
This is just something I do.
So I'll go out on hikes or I'll walk around my neighborhood with the intention of looking for things to take photos of and put on iNaturalist. I have a 2-year-old. He comes with me and we look for bugs together and we catch things and observe them and photograph them on iNaturalist. And so this is a fun thing you can do as a family too. But there are some, if you're doing that, there are some fun tools that you can bring along. And I think the question about using a ruler is a really great one. I think having some kind of small ruler you can bring along to photograph things next to can certainly be really useful. And so like that can be finding anything from some sort of an insect to a plant. Maybe you can showcase, the height of it or the width of the leaves or the flowers. But also if you see, say, signs of wild living things, we didn't really quite get to this.
Oh yeah. Could you take a picture of like a footprint or even poop?
Exactly. Yeah. So totally. So yeah, this gets back to your game of, can I observe it? Yes, definitely. Evidence of wild living things are fabulous things to add to iNaturalist. So scat is a great thing. It's perfect evidence of a wild living thing being there. And sometimes is how we know they're around. Some animals are nocturnal. They're hanging out at night. We're not necessarily hanging out at night. That's also turns out a pretty bad time to take photos of things because it's dark. So the next day, maybe you see some scat in your yard that looks a little interesting, and maybe it belongs to a raccoon or something else that's hanging out at night that you didn't know was there. You can also take pictures of animal tracks and footprints. And so having a ruler when you take pictures of scat and tracks is a really helpful way to know what species you're looking at, because certain species of cats or wild dogs, maybe their prints look very similar, but the sizing matters a lot, and knowing what kind of species it is. So having a ruler is a good idea. If you don't have a ruler, you could always use other things like putting your hand down or your shoe or something else that you could then go home and measure. And then you can edit the observation you've made on iNaturalist and add a note that says,
I think about when we did bugs, I did like a quarter. I would just put down a quarter next to them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So there are other things that you can use to sort of measure something. So it doesn't have to necessarily be a ruler. I think other fun tools to take when you're being a citizen scientist of natural things, especially when you're using iNaturalist, it's helpful to have some kind of a container sometimes to put small things into. So definitely insects. And I'm looking around my basement. I didn't actually prep anything to show you for this, but here's like, there's a box that had a phone in it at one point. Like, this is just like some random thing I have in my house. You can be using something like this to put a small insect into so you can get a closer look at it. And also, if it's something like this that has a white background, that's going to
picture taken.
Exactly. That'll help with photography a lot better, because if you're trying to take a picture of an insect against the dirt or the grass and it's a busy background, it might not show up that well. But if it's against a white background, it'll show up a lot better. So having some kind of a receptacle or way to catch the thing is helpful. And if you have access to things like butterfly nets or other bug nets, those can be really helpful and fun ways to catch things. You can even just take a butterfly net and swipe it across any kind of grass, even if it's just like green grass you have in your yard. You could swipe a net across, look inside, and there will be little things jumping around, tiny little insects that live in the grass. You can do that swiping across vines and trees.
Oh
And
yeah. Christy Bills, we were talking about the different ways you could like collect bugs, and she was talking about there's a bunch of different kinds of nets, and I really like she was talking about like you just go and like it sounds like you just go and hit a bush with a net and then the bugs fall out into like a collector on the bottom and to just like shake a bush. Who knows what falls out?
It's totally true. And really, I'm trying to think of ways that you can do that from your house, even if you don't have things like nets. If you just even get some kind of a white cloth or a blanket or a
Oh,
towel,
bugs love it.
and you can shake bushes and things and just have something below that they can fall onto. You'll see stuff, and it's pretty cool. The things that are sort of hiding among little vines. You have no idea they're there, but they are.
Yeah. Well, friends, if you have more questions for myself or Ellen, please feel free to click the Ask a Question button or leave us a comment on Facebook. I have a comment from Julie. She had commented earlier. She says, on 2 different days, a ladybug landed on her shirt and she took pictures. Now, one was a 7-spotted ladybug and one was a 2-spotted ladybug. And she never noticed that there were 2 different species of ladybug right in her own backyard.
Awesome. I love that story.
Pretty cool story. Hey, Ellen, do you have any any fun or cool story? Like I know this is kind of like a big question. But like to you, why is citizen science like what are some really cool things about citizen science? I guess is one of my questions. Like let's just fangirl about citizen science for a second.
Okay, well, and just cut in if I talk too long, because I might.
I know I could I think you and I could just talk about citizen science like ever and ever. How about this? We'll just like do a quick story trade of like a favorite citizen science story from you, and then like I have like a favorite historical citizen science story I'd love to tell.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Well, so getting at sort of your first question of sort of things I love about citizen science in general, I think that's what I might focus on. So there are several layers of that for me. One is that like on a very personal level, it is a really fun, awesome way for me to just connect with science. And so it wasn't a field that I chose to study in school. I studied other things, but that doesn't mean I don't love science, because I do. And so citizen science has really been an amazing way for me to still connect with that interest that I have, while also connecting with research and contributing to research. And so that's the other thing that I love, is not only is it enriching to me and fun to me and something that helps broaden my knowledge of the places that I live and honestly my knowledge of the world in general, but I'm also helping scientists and contributing some interesting data that wouldn't have been available otherwise, because I happened to be the one out in my yard at a certain moment seeing a certain insect, or I happened to be helping get online to transcribe some cool data or something. And so that's fun, because it's this sort of, so I think of citizen science as this really awesome kind of conversation, if you will, between members of the public and scientists, where you're both learning from each other and helping each other grow, which is so cool.
Yeah, I think all of the like helping scientists and helping everybody grow, like all of that, I think is so important, especially because I think that everybody's first brushes with nature are usually the things in their own, backyard. The chances that like a kid from Miami, was going to bump into an African elephant when I was a little kid, like real slim, right? Yeah. But the chances that I was going to see like a cool heron or a little millipede, like really high. And those are some of my first memories with nature. And I think that that's really special. Speaking of like first memories of nature. So I want to share this story. This is one of my favorite stories of all time, because when I was a kid, I really loved monarch butterflies, easily one of my favorites. And I have to share this citizen science story because I've been thinking about it since our friend from Park City messaged in earlier about like citizen science discoveries. Here's the story. Before iNaturalist and the internet and all that stuff, citizen science was still happening, and people were like catching monarch butterflies, and they were taking teeny tiny little pieces of paper with numbers on them and making a little fold and putting them on the butterfly wings. And that was how we learned a bit about, like, that's how we learned about monarch migration, is people catching butterflies, recording when they found a butterfly with like a little number on its wing. All of that is how we learned about, and citizen science is how we learned about monarch migration. And I think it's one of my favorite citizen science stories, just because I love butterflies, and also it's awesome. I can't even imagine like folding a tiny piece of paper. I bet nowadays that study would probably look really different. What are when we submit this data to iNaturalist, how would we conduct that similar study now here in the future with all of our like cool technology stuff? Do you think we could pull off that same like monarch? Do you think we could still figure out that question using the technology we have now?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I think even more so. And the thing that I think is pretty cool is that I think now even more people can access that and contribute to it than could before. And so the access to that for citizens or for community members in general is heightened, which is pretty exciting. That's fun. I love all that, Aiden.
Yeah, I love it too. We have a few other questions. Oh, another question of, can I observe it? What if I find a bone or skull in a forest? Would that be good for iNaturalist? That comes to us from Sydney, from Logan.
I love that question, Sydney. And yes, that is a fabulous thing to add to iNaturalist. It's evidence of a living thing, even though it's not living anymore. And if you can get closer and even see if there's some kind of marks on it, maybe it was some kind of a kill. There might be teeth marks or scratches. That could be an interesting thing to find too. And related, this is sort of a little more gruesome. But if anyone comes across something that's more freshly not alive in the woods, but also like something like roadkill, that also maybe seems at first glance like it's not a wild thing, but it definitely is. And so roadkill is tricky because you need to make sure you're in a safe place when you take a photo of something. And so it's not safe to take a picture while you're driving. It's not always safe to pull off on the side of the road and get out of your car. And so consider that before you take a picture of something.
Safety first.
Definitely safety first.
Key and critical.
It's right. But we, for example, have some observations of fox squirrels that have been made that were hit by cars in places. And that's still really useful data. And to add to that, sometimes places like the Natural History Museum might be even interested in some of those dead species,
carcasses and things like
specimens. That. And so that's something that you can also contact the museum about. And fox squirrels sort of fall into that category. Their museum scientists might be interested to come out and actually pick up that thing and bring it into the museum for some genetic testing, or to have the pelt and do some more studies with that too. So that's a different kind of layer of research that isn't for everybody, and that's totally fine. But if that's something that piques your interest, you can look into it more.
Yeah, safety first, number one. Also, number two is that sometimes you should not pick up dead things. Make sure, and also important for us to say that like people cannot also collect up everything that they find on the side of the road that's passed away. There's like actual laws and things about that, and some of those are for health reasons and whatnot. But also important, right? It all falls under the umbrella of like safety first.
Very much so. So yeah, exactly. And if that is something that you're sort of interested, or like I said, piques your interest, do some research on that sort of topic before you move forward with anything like that.
Yeah, before you get in too deep on vulture culture, make sure you know the kinds of like laws that protect the animals when they're living and dead.
Yes.
Jason from Salt Lake City asks, if there's a lot of if there are a lot of plants from the same species in one area, should I photograph one or a lot of them?
Good question, Jason. So when we're hosting a BioBlitz, we're in, say, a city park, this comes up all the time because, there are, for example, many dandelions within a city park. the way that a BioBlitz functions is to catalog all of the individual beings that we're finding. And so that means every dandelion plant that we're seeing. And so if there's a picture, so if we say there were hundreds of dandelions in a field at a park that we're observing, or in my backyard, which may or may not be the case.
Same. I leave them for the bees.
Yeah,
bees need them.
So if I took a picture of just one of them and that was the representation for dandelions in my yard, then absolutely it's showcasing that there are dandelions present there, but it's not showcasing how many of them there are. And so that's an interesting thing when we're looking at data, is how much of something there is. If we're bioblitzing and we in a park and we find 200 dandelion plants, and which are a non-native species, and then we find one of a native species or none of a native species, then that's showing us that potentially the native species that we want to be seeing there aren't able to grow, and maybe the dandelions are a reason, or maybe there are other things that are a reason. And so taking pictures of everything you see helps fill in that biodiversity puzzle better.
Cool. I hope that answers your question. It's very thorough. So far, you're very much crushing it on can you observe it?
I like the questions. You're asking the right things.
I know that there's sometimes some question about like, ooh, can I not? I understand that people don't want to like clog up the tubes of the internet with like too much like, this is not something that would be helpful for scientists. I appreciate that everybody wants to do a good job and help out scientists. And also when you're submitting these pictures, like you yourself are being a scientist in a lot of ways.
It's totally right. And I think that really is a common thing. If you happen to be new to iNaturalist, or maybe you're not quite so new to iNaturalist, it's really easy. And I felt this when I first joined the site several years ago. It's really easy to feel like, oh, I didn't really see anything cool enough to put on iNaturalist, or, like I just like today, like I saw a robin and I saw a magpie, and like, they're common things you see all the time. And so you feel like maybe it's not awesome enough to add. Like you want to wait for the rattlesnake or that you safely take a picture of, or the bald eagle flying by your window, and those things very well might happen and be things that you find at some point, but more often than not you're seeing those more common things. And just because it's a robin doesn't mean it's not interesting. And even if people aren't searching for it right now or doing active projects on it right now, doesn't mean they won't be in the future. And so another amazing thing about iNaturalist is that it really is collecting this record of biodiversity over time. And so as things shift in the world based on temperatures and various climate things that are happening, if we have a cool record of how things look now, how many species are living in different areas and what they're interacting with, as things change, we can then go back and look and say, wow, looks like fox squirrels used to only be here and now they're all over here. And so there's a cool story to tell. And so you taking a picture of whatever it is that you're seeing, no matter what it is that you're seeing, will contribute to that.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, I did not grow up with magpies. I think that I know that some people out there don't care for them, but I really think that they're fantastic and so sassy. I love them so much. So like what might be cool to you is not necessarily what's cool to someone else.
Cool. And Aiden, I have
all of it.
I have a short story that I could tell you about how, like an example of a time where maybe somebody didn't really realize what they were taking a photo of, or they thought it was
oh yes,
normal.
Please.
This was several years ago, but there was a person who was out, they were in Southeast Asia and an island off the coast of Vietnam, and they were taking pictures of various things that they were seeing on this island and putting them on iNaturalist. And one of them was a species of snail that they did not know about, but they saw and they took a picture of it. And it took about a year. But a year or so later, a scientist who knows a lot about snails was looking at iNaturalist and saw the photo that had been taken. And they were super psyched because it was a picture of a snail that scientifically had never been photographed as a living species. So there were pictures of its shell, and it had been recorded initially. The first record of it in science ever was drawn by Captain James Cook when he's exploring in the 1700s. And so it had never been photographed as a living thing until about, I think, 2015, maybe 2014 is when this person took the picture. And
Wow.
like, this person was not a snail researcher. They weren't out there actively looking for this. They just happened to be in the right place at the right time and took a photo of it and put it on iNaturalist. That's pretty cool.
That's amazing. Take a picture of everything, folks.
Yeah, you never know.
I have a question here that has to do with accessibility. Is Alexa asks an excellent question. Is the iNaturalist app Spanish friendly?
Yes, there is. There's a really awesome, and it comes in many different languages, and iNaturalist actually exists in lots of different, in hundreds of countries all around the world. And so if you are watching this and you don't live in the US, you can download iNaturalist for your own country. There's a really, so iNaturalist has iNaturalista, which is the site in Spanish, and it's fabulous. Yes, use it.
Awesome. Wonderful. I love seeing scientific projects that are inclusive for as many people as possible.
Yeah.
Let's see. Any final, how about this? What is your favorite thing ever you have submitted to iNaturalist?
I love this. And so I've been asked this a couple times this summer, and so I've had some time to sort of mull on it. And this morning I was rethinking of that question. I was like, what is my favorite thing? So I was prepared kind of for that. And so
Yes.
my current favorite thing that I've
Sure.
observed, and I can share my picture with you again, is it's actually from last year. And I was hanging out in my yard. It was the evening time. I was watering some plants. It was beautiful sort of evening light. I was having just sort of a nice time. And this thing caught my eye. In the corner of my eye, I saw this thing. And I was like, what is that? And at the time I was like, oh my gosh, this has to be super important. And I was very much like in this kind of like, I'm going to make a cool discovery. No one's ever seen this in Utah before. And it was of this really big, it's a type of moth. It's called a sphinx moth.
Mhm.
And I was like, because I had never seen them here, and I was so excited. It turns out they're pretty common and they're here all the time. And so I wasn't making a big discovery. But for me, I was seeing something new in my yard because it wasn't a time I was always out there. The vines that I have growing in my yard were blooming at the time. So it was just, again, like a right place at the right time. And I was able to snap this photo of this sphinx moth. And so it was so exciting for me because I at first was like, yes, this is going to be amazing. And then people are commenting and they're like, yeah, this is just, common thing to see. So I learned something, but also I've since then go out and I know the time of day I can kind of be more likely to maybe see them, and they're big little, they're big.
Oh yeah, they've got kind of like when they fly, there's definitely like a like
Exactly, yeah, you hear them, and so anyway, it's pretty fun. So ever since then I kind of go out and I look for them, and it's a fun thing. So
they've got great stripes and they've got cute faces.
Oh yeah, and they look really exotic, and so it was, yeah. So that was a fun thing for me it was a good memory for me. I was like, I remember when I thought that was going to be some kind of groundbreaking discovery.
That's an excellent story. I love it. We have a question. Mike from Moab asks, when is the next BioBlitz?
Mike, I love your question. So I mentioned our Salt Lake City Neighborhood Naturalists program. We're going to be BioBlitzing once per month all summer. So we'll be doing a week-long BioBlitz in June, week-long BioBlitz in July, and another one in August. Those will happen at the end of each month. But those are going to be right here in the Salt Lake Valley, unfortunately. So unfortunately for you. So if you're going to be in Moab, that won't work. But that doesn't mean, as I mentioned earlier, you can't just sort of BioBlitz on your own. And so part of the summer programming that we're working at with the museum is to encourage people to do their own sort of neighborhood or backyard BioBlitzes. And so you can make your own iNaturalist project online and set some parameters. You can set a location for where you want to be BioBlitzing. You could get your friends together, your family together, whoever. And this is something you could do without interacting with people directly, or you could do it within a 6-foot distance and be safe while you're social distancing, and you can gather together at the same time or at different times and all sort of work together to see how much biodiversity you can find in a specific place. And there are lots of awesome things that you can find down in Moab, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah, it's beautiful down there. Also, like, I know that the museum hosts a lot of, on our website, we have a lot of iNaturalist resources. If it's something that you or anybody is in particular interested in using as like a teaching tool about biodiversity and science itself, there's lots of resources at the Natural History Museum of Utah's website. Well, Ellen, the time just flies by every time you and I chit chat.
It's true.
It really just it flies like a sphinx moth.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Ellen. You absolutely rule. Um, Friends who are joining us on the internet who are not Ellen, thank you for joining us as well. On Monday, we are going to be having another class. We're going to continue our investigation of the Uinta Forest with our Research Quest Live. That's going to be happening at 9:30 Mountain Daylight Time on our Research Quest website. And then we'll have more interviews all next week starting at 11. So be sure to tune in. Anybody who's interested, and we will see you all Monday. Ellen, thank you again so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Aiden. I've had a wonderful, wonderful time with you.
You're just the best, Ellen. Bye, Ellen.
Bye, citizen scientists.
Bye, scientists.